coming today. So my name is Stéphanie Malik Pilon, and I'm a fifth-year student currently doing ELA with a minor in TESOL, and I'm part of the For Real project. For those who may not be familiar, the For Real project aims to generate new ideas in thinking, doing, and being as teachers. So the idea is to create resources for teachers, educators, and for it to be reliable. So all of the talks that we've had can be found on Dr. Sunny's website, which I will link later below. I would like to begin today's meeting with a land acknowledgement. So Bishop's University is located on the unceded territory of the Abenaki people. So we acknowledge that we are settlers on this land and that we will continue to educate ourselves and work towards reparative actions. I will invite anyone in the chat to also share the land acknowledgement from their area. So, for example, I'm a visitor coming from Laval, which is the land of Teokiteke, pardon my pronunciation, and which is located on the traditional territory of the Mohawk Nation. I come with respect for this land that I am on today and for people who have and do reside here. I commit to being a better teacher, listener, and advocate for Indigenous communities. But I reflect that the land acknowledgement is only one small part in terms of supporting the Indigenous community. Therefore, I also commit to being a lifelong learner and to continuously put in the work to educate myself and my future students by amplifying the voices of Indigenous people and being critical of coloniality. For this webinar, we welcome today's speaker, Zhongfeng Tian, who believes in multilingual justice and equity, and he will be giving a talk titled Translanguaging in Action, Rethinking Language, Teaching, and Research for Justice Change. So this webinar explores translanguaging as both a theory and pedagogy that reimagines how we teach, learn, and research English as an additional language. Zhongfeng Tian will discuss how translanguaging disrupts monolingual ideology, norms, and affirms multilingual students' identities. So he's a very, very accomplished speaker, and I had the pleasure of seeing him talk in person yesterday at Bishop's. So he's an associate professor of bilingual education at Rutgers University, New York, and a Fulbright specialist. If you don't know what a Fulbright specialist is, it's really accomplished field. I had to look it up. That's pretty cool. His focus is on translanguaging, pedagogy, dual language, bilingual education, TESOL, and teacher education. And he really, like I said, he has a strong emphasis on multilingual justice and equity. He's written and authored over 40 peer-reviewed articles. I don't know where you find the time. And in leading journals, co-edited 10 books, 10 special issues, while also leading funded projects, for example, that co-design anti-racist biliteracy programs with teachers and families. So outside of academia, he's really engaged to public scholarship, mentorship, and professional development for educators. So in terms of this presentation, I really ask that you can write your questions in the chat so we kind of give the chance to listen to our speaker. After this presentation, we'll have some time for questions, and then the material, if you want some of it, like we'll make things really accessible. So we ask everyone to kindly keep their mics off just so we could hear the speaker, and just again, it's being recorded, so if you're uncomfortable with that, you can turn your cameras off, and it's just for educational purposes. So basically, today our speaker will invite participants to reflect on their own teaching practices and consider the social justice implications of translanguaging and ways to equitably connect research with practice. So now I'm going to leave the floor to our speaker to learn a bit more about this and what that means.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm so happy to be here and sharing this space with you all. And I'm also really looking forward to our conversation after my talk. So as Stephanie said, my talk really focuses on translanguaging in action, and I'm going to talk about how translanguaging provides us with a lens to rethink language teaching and research for justice and change. Next page. So please allow me to introduce myself a little bit more. So I'm currently an associate professor of bilingual education at Rutgers University, Newark. So I'm a multilingual speaker of Mandarin, English, and Cantonese. So in Chinese, we say 你好,欢迎大家. And I also have transnational experience in teaching experience in China, Cambodia, and the US. So my research is theoretically grounded in translanguaging, which really centers on working with pre and in-service teachers to provide multilingual students with equitable and inclusive learning environments in ESL and bilingual education contexts. As you can see, some of my publications here, I have published extensively on the topic of translanguaging. So particular, these 6 books focus on translanguaging in different aspects, right? TESOL, English medium instruction, teacher education, teacher-researcher collaboration, translanguaging and multimodality, and one of the most recent one is about decolonizing academic writing through translingualism. So if you're interested, I invite you to check out these books, and if your institution doesn't have access, I'm more than happy to share the full copy of the book with you all. And so next, the different questions that we're going to address in today's talk. So they are, what is translanguaging theory? What is a translanguaging pedagogy? How do we implement translanguaging pedagogies to support multilingual learners in culturally and linguistically diverse ESL, EAL classrooms? And how is translanguaging related to social justice and equity in culturally and linguistically diverse classrooms? Next one. So upon completion this talk, I hope we will be able to define translanguaging as theory and pedagogy and identify different ways to implement translanguaging pedagogies in classrooms and connect translanguaging to issues of social justice and equity. Okay, so now let's begin with defining what translanguaging is, translanguaging as theory. Next one. So translanguaging really describes how bilinguals make sense of their bilingual worlds. So as Garcia 2009 states, translanguaging describes the multiple discursive practices in which bilinguals engage in order to make sense of their bilingual worlds. So what she's saying here is multilingual speakers constantly and strategically draw upon their different linguistic resources to make meaning. So for example, when I talk to my multilingual friends and colleagues, I will use Mandarin, Cantonese, and English all together in a united way, right? This is called translanguaging. This is the communicative norm of bilingual communities. And to further unpack this term, right? So why we call it translanguaging, right? Let's just unpack this term a little bit further. So here we see language, as you can see, language here, we see it as a verb. Instead of a traditional sense, we always see, okay, we speak different languages, language as this noun, right? Because we always language to gain knowledge, to make sense, and to communicate, right? Language is always a verb for us. And the suffix ing, we know ing indicates the ongoing, never stop this process, right? Because we never stop language, right? As human beings, languaging is an ongoing meaning negotiation process. And the prefix trans, so trans here means transcending, going beyond, because as bi and multilingual speakers, our sense-making processes always go beyond language boundaries, right? They are dynamic, flexible, and complex, transcending different linguistic structures, cognitive and semiotic systems, and modalities, right? Translanguaging is bilinguals' ways of being, doing, and knowing, right? This is just how we naturally engage in sense-making. Right, so as you can see the pictures on the right, right, for people who speak both Spanish and English, right, a lot of time they engage in Spanglish, right, like the translanguaging practices a lot, right. Yeah, so this is translanguaging practices. So where did this term originally come from, right? Let's just talk a little bit about the history of this term and its development. So this term translanguaging comes from the Welsh, this term, yeah, which first coined by Sam Williams in 1994. So in its original inception, it referred to a pedagogical practice where students are asked to alternate the languages of input and output in Welsh English bilingual classrooms. So for example, students may read a text in English, and then they are asked to produce a written text in Welsh to demonstrate their understanding. So according to Sam Williams, he suggests that translanguaging often uses the stronger language to develop the weaker language as a way to develop Welsh students' bilingualism. And with the term translanguaging being developed in the Welsh education circles, combined with its potential to build on the dynamic bilingualism of learners, translanguaging has caught the imagination of many bilingual educators and colleagues and scholars in North American and other European contexts, right? So later, specifically, Ophelia Garcia, who's based in the US, and Li Wei, who's based in the UK, they both extended the notion of translanguaging and discussed this notion in two seminal books, right? So as you can see in the pictures, right? Ophelia's book, Bilingual Education in the 21st Century, and their co-authored publication, Translanguaging, right? Which is sort of like the foundation work of translanguaging. If you want to know more about translanguaging, this is the first book. This is a must-read book for you to get to know about translanguaging as theory and pedagogy. So that's the history of translanguaging. And as I mentioned before, translanguaging as theory represents a more holistic, dynamic perspective to understand and to examine bilingualism, right? So it is very different from the traditional view of bilingualism, which conceptualize bilingualism as two separate, rigid, static language systems, right? Just simply L1 plus L2. Right. And on the contrary, translanguaging captures this dynamic process of bilinguals meaning making. They strategically and creatively select linguistic features from this one unitary linguistic repertoire based on different contexts, right? So here you can see F represent different linguistic features. N denotes an indefinite number of those different linguistic features within this one unitary repertoire. Next one. And a lot of you may ask, right, isn't language mixing called code switching, right? So what is this difference between translanguaging and code switching, right? And I have to just a disclaimer, right? It has been a very contentious topic actually in the field. Like we don't agree with each other actually on these differences, right? So in today's talk, I don't want to go into too much, right, in terms of the theoretical debate, but I just briefly present the pictures, right? Like in terms of how I see the differences between translanguaging and code switching, right? So before explaining the difference, I want to introduce a term called named languages, right? As you can see here. So which discusses that languages are socially constructed linguistic categories created by humans, right? We actually humans create these labels to say, okay, this language we call it English, and then we have Mandarin, right? We have French, we have Spanish, right? It's usually associated with language policy planning, right? Connect to the nation states, right? These kind of language ideologies. These are named languages, right? Seen from an external or societal perspective. Right. So code switching therefore takes a more like an external perspective, because we often talk about you switch from one language code to another language code, right? So from one named language to another. So code switching is more from an external perspective. However, from an internal perspective, these named languages are just individuals' different linguistic features within their one unitary repertoire. Right? So translanguaging theory is then taking from this internal perspective, standing from the point of view of themselves. So you can see this definition at the bottom of this slide, right? Translanguaging is the deployment of a speaker's full linguistic repertoire without regard for watchful adherence to the socially and politically defined boundaries of named and usually national and state languages. So let's take myself as an example, right? So from an external perspective, you may observe me code switching between English and Mandarin Chinese. But from an internal, my own perspective, I'm just simply selecting different linguistic features to make meaning. And these features are given labels as Mandarin or English by the society. So you can see both code switching and translanguaging help us describe and understand bilingual language mixing performances, but they take different perspectives. And this is the major difference, I think. So translanguaging focuses more on how bilingual speakers themselves actually do bilingualism without being conformed to the societal monolingual norms. It legitimizes bilinguals' unique and sophisticated ways of sense making, which has important pedagogical implications, which we're going to discuss. So now let's move on to translanguaging as pedagogy. So we as educators should build upon and leverage multilingual students' translanguaging practices to support their learning. So a quick definition for translanguaging as pedagogy. So it refers to the ways in which bilingual students and teachers engage in complex and fluid discursive practices that include at times the home language practices of students in order to make sense of teaching and learning, to communicate an appropriate subject knowledge, and to develop the academic language practices, right? So specifically speaking, translanguaging pedagogy acknowledges students' bi and multilingualism as a resource, right? It sees language as resource. And it invites students to bring their home language practices, their cultural background knowledge into academic teaching and learning. It incorporates multilingual, multimodal teaching strategies and aims to form a co-learning space where teachers and students could learn from each other and all language practices are equally valued. Right. So instead of maintaining an English-only classroom or a target language-only classroom, translanguaging pedagogy supports creating a multilingual classroom for culturally and linguistically diverse learners, such as one example, as you can see here, building a cognitive wall, right, as one example, right? So that students can engage in cross-linguistic comparisons, right, like to see the differences. Okay, next one. So in this book, The Translanguaging Classroom, right? So Ophelia Garcia, Susanna Ibra Johnson, and Kate Selzer, they talks about educators need to develop the three interrelated strengths in order to take up a translanguaging pedagogy, which I think is really important for if you work in teacher education field, right? So specifically, a teacher must first develop a translanguaging stance, so which is defined as asset-based beliefs and the ideologies that inform teachers' approach to teaching multilingual students. Secondly, a teacher must engage in translanguaging design. They purposefully and strategically design classroom space, instruction, and assessment that aligns with and emerges from a translanguaging stance and leverages the translanguaging Korean day, right? So the translanguaging Korean day, which means the flows, right? The ever present multilingual flow in the classroom, right? Because regardless of the language policy at the macro level, right? Students' translanguaging practices are always present in the classroom, right? As long as you work with a group of multilingual students, right? They will always engage in translanguaging practices. The teacher's job here is to bring the invisible to the visible level, right? How can we strategically leverage these translanguaging flows, incorporate them strategically into academic tasks? So this is, I think, what the teacher really needs to focus on, right? How do you systemically design different translanguaging spaces? And thirdly, a teacher must be ready for translanguaging shifts, right? Teachers, it is important and they must be flexible and willing to make moment by moment decisions within a translanguaging design that respond to the Korean day and to the students' needs, interests, and connections. So these are the three interrelated strands of a translanguaging pedagogy. I think now I'm going to show you an example to give you concrete ideas of how to implement translanguaging pedagogy in culturally and linguistically diverse classrooms. So this video is part of the Teaching Bilinguals, even if you are not one, web series developed by the CUNY, which represents City University of New York State Initiative on Emerging Bilinguals team. So I really love their resources. If you want to check more resources, all the resources are available to the public, and they have tons of resources, I can guarantee you. And please keep this question in mind as you watch this video, right? So where do you see evidence of the translanguaging stance, design, and shifts in this video? I think this video is about 5 minutes, right? So I think you can just click on it and then let's watch it together. Sunny. Yes.
Please let me know if you can hear the sound. Did you hear the sound? No? Okay. I need to stop sharing first because
Sunny, press it because we barely heard it.
Oh, but there might be a button that I need to press. Okay, let me do it again.
Others, but most often they speak Mandarin together. Hey teachers, welcome to Teaching Bilinguals, even if you're not one. I'm in Manhattan, Chinatown this week at PS 126, a K through 8 school, where English is a new.
Sorry.
No worries, just try again and just click the video, and then audio is always a little tricky on Teams, no worries.
Can you all hear the video?
Yes, we can hear. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Then I will. Okay. So maybe I'll just go out. Okay.
Speak Taishanese, Fujin, Mandarin, and maybe one or two others, but most often they speak Mandarin together. Hey teachers, welcome to Teaching Bilinguals, even if you're not one. I'm in Manhattan, Chinatown this week at PS 126, a K through 8 school, where English as a new language teacher, Miss Valentine Berry, has been harnessing her students' bilingual superpowers by teaching them to create graphic novels. Let's take a peek inside. I love graphic novels. I love reading them with students, in particular English as a new language learners, English as language learners. So with my lower grades, my 3rd grade students, I read Luke on a Loose as a second graphic novel that we read together. With my older students, 5th, 6th, 7th graders, I read American Born Chinese with them. It's a little, linguistically, it's a little above their level because they are newcomers, but because it's a graphic novel, it's really rich in pictures. And one of the characters is the Monkey King, and it's a story that the Chinese students know as part of legend and history. As I was reading the graphic novels, the students really were into them, and that made me just get really excited. Who doesn't want to be their own superhero in a graphic novel, right? We first started with notebook grading, and the students had to write a checklist that I had created for them. They copied it into their notebooks, and it had all the different things that they needed to write about. I noticed this part's in English and this part is in Chinese. How did you decide, or how did they decide what to do in what language? So their likes and families, different family members are things that we've already talked about in part of our units. When a student writes in their home language, it's them trying to express themselves, and to just even at least start with that is very beneficial for them because they at least can get their ideas across even if you can't read it, and then use that as like a springboard to like, okay, now let's focus on where we need to build their English skills. They had their introduction page, they went into their likes and dislikes. for example, went into like, I like to read, I like to play with my friends, and here reading, she used a speech bubble, and here she's not talking because she used a narrator box, and that was really fun. And then when we get to her writing about her home, again, she did I am from China because it was a prompt, and then she was allowed to write in Chinese and then drew about it, and then that's where I'm able to start figuring out a little bit more of what she's writing. This was an older student. He just likes being silly, and one of his favorite words is banana, but he doesn't say it like banana, and he intentionally says banana. And when we get into the I lived in China, he said there have very much good food, but China school have very much homework. I don't like homework. When he was talking and planning, he was speaking a lot of Chinese with the other students. And then when he would write something funny like this and I like this, then he would say things like that in English. Or if he thought it was good, he would like show someone and he would say it in English. But then he decided to actually write, this student decided to write the whole book in English. Why is that? I think it's just his way of trying to step his game up to the next level.
To recap, during our visit to Ms. Valentine Berry's class, you heard her mention a few ways she's used students' bilingualism as a resource. In her graphic novels project, she drew on culturally relevant texts. She encouraged students to use English for things she's already taught, and home language to facilitate their expression of deeper ideas. She also opened up space for students to process ideas out loud to themselves and peers in whatever language came naturally. She proves that you can teach bilinguals even if you're not one. Join us next time.
Thank you, Sunny. We can go back to a slide. So you got this idea, right? For the sake of time, I think let's save the discussion later. So you can see. So I think this is an exercise actually you can do. Go back, Sunny. Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Exercise that you can do with your students if you're a teacher educator, right? You can actually play the video and let them have conversation about, so what do you see, right? Like what are some translanguaging strategies that teacher use, right? Like so this slide is more like an answer key, right? Like so I hope you enjoyed watching the video and are already developing some ideas, right? Of how do you implement translanguaging pedagogies in classrooms. And here is how we can map the 3 strands of the translanguaging pedagogy onto this teacher's practices, right? So here you see for translanguaging stance, we see that she sees students' immersion bilingualism as a resource, right? All students have complex ideas to express, and the expression of those ideas is more important than a perfect utterance in the target language. Right. And in terms of translanguaging design, she purposefully chooses culturally relevant graphic novels as texts and makes purposeful decisions about language objectives and writing. Right. And for translanguaging shifts, she demonstrates flexibility in approach to language use in the classroom while paying attention to student behaviors and choices and analyzing their work accordingly. Right. So these are the different ways that you just see from the video. I also want to give you some example stuff from my own empirical research, right? Like so the next one I'm going to show you is an example that my research in Chinese immersion programs, right? Which I hope to give you more ideas of designing translanguaging spaces. So in Chinese immersion programs, as you can imagine, there's only Chinese only rules, right? In classroom, right? Like so students are now allowed to bring other languages in the classroom. So Miss Lee and I worked with a 3rd grade Chinese immersion teacher, right, in her class, and this was a project that we designed together. It's called Cultural Day Project, which encourages students to explore their own family traditions that celebrate in their own households, right? So Sunny, you can just click. So the first step is we send a letter home to their students' parents. And a lot of these students, they come from English dominant households, right? So we decided to write a letter, drafted a letter in English, right? So that the parents could understand what is expected from this project. And students, they could also read this letter to get a better understanding of this Cultural Day project. And then we provided students with this worksheets with guiding questions written in English. We asked them to enter their parents and also using all their linguistic resources available in their household to gather the information, right? Such as what is one cultural holiday that being celebrated in their household, right? What are what are some clothing that you usually wear, right? And what is some food that usually also go to eat, right, to celebrate this festival and tradition with your family. And then next one, just click, yeah. And then after gathering the information from their households, we asked the students to translate their English information into this new worksheet that we provided, now written in Mandarin, right? You can see we provided some scaffolds this time with some sentence starters written in Mandarin and also some guiding questions written in Mandarin, right? So, and I also put a quote unquote under translate, right? Because it is not just simply word by word translation. Students were also learning how to recontextualize information, resynthesize information into a new linguistic environment, right, during this process. And then we asked the student to make slides based on their outline. We provided them with templates written in Mandarin, and they can choose to enrich their slides by adding pictures or other emojis, let's say, right? And then we give students enough time to do oral rehearsal. And then we invite them to present their project to the whole class, right? So as you can see, this whole process was really dynamic. We strategically create different moments for students to draw upon their entire linguistic repertoire, but also encourage them to use Mandarin at different times so that they can continue to improve their Mandarin skills while having the wiggle room to use all their linguistic resources available to them and also across different modalities. Next one. And this was the most exciting part, right? Students, they shared the different culture days celebrated in their own households. And this was also a good opportunity for students to continue to build a more inclusive cross-cultural community in their class, right? Miss Lee and I, we also got to know a lot of students' family traditions and holidays being celebrated in their households, right? So you can see there are actually a variety of culture days celebrated in this community, right? From Kazakhstan to Chinese New Year to Canada Day to Mid-Autumn Festival, right? Passover and Lantern Festival, right? And etc. This was just, a few examples that I show you here. Okay, next one. And again, this is a resource. It's like a one-pager. I think teachers always love this kind of one-pager thing, right? So that can be their sort of like go-to resources if they are thinking, okay, so how can I do translanguaging? What are some strategies that I can that I can experiment with, right? So here you can see there are more concrete ideas for you to incorporate translanguaging into your own teaching. In this handout, this was also developed by the CUNY NICEP team. So you will see how translanguaging can be implemented in reading, writing, speaking, and listening across the curriculum. So I'm sure you will have more time after today's webinar to take a more careful look and think about its relevance to your own teaching context, right? And remember, translanguaging is not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? You need to adjust those different translanguaging strategies based on the context and learners that you work with. Next one. And as you continue to develop your understanding of translanguaging as theory and pedagogy, I'd like to emphasize that translanguaging is more than just a set of teaching strategies. It is an approach that has transformed power because it concerns about both language and equity. Right? Teachers who draw from translanguaging also center social justice issues in their curriculum in ways that positively promote racialized bilingual children's backgrounds and experiences in the classroom. So by mobilizing multilingual students' full linguistic repertoire in teaching and learning, translanguaging demonstrates a way of caring for racialized community by validating their own knowledge, their own ways of knowing and practice, and leveraging them in their education. right? So I'm the teacher to see translanguaging as just mere scaffolding strategies, right? Actually, translanguaging is more about creating a more socially just and equitable environment so that their different ways of knowing, being, and thinking are also valued and leveraged in this co-learning space. Next one. So teachers have the capacity to impress upon students that their cultural and language backgrounds matter in the classroom and in their education. We encourage teachers to design equitable classroom policies and practices, critique current deficit-oriented practices, and reimagine expansive futures that center the experiences of racialized bilingual students in their own classroom and the larger school community in positive ways. So we firmly believe that a translanguaging pedagogy provides teachers with the tools to include social justice and equity issues simultaneously with language learning in all classrooms. So here I'm going to show you these two paintings, right? Because arts is a really powerful way to show resistance and to fight against the monolingual structures, right? And maybe let's take just 1 or 2 minutes to pause and reflect and think about what are these two paintings mean to you, right? Like because arts, these are open to interpretation, right? If some of you would like to share your thoughts when you see these two paintings, feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah, I think we can allow 1 or 2 volunteers if you want to share your thoughts. And I also put the artist name under the painting because these are great scholars, but also artists. Anyone want to share?
I think my mic is open, so I can just share. I think the picture on the painting on the left, immediately, I think it's very powerful for me. I just watched the documentary on residential schools, and it reminds me of how indigenous children's languages are not being got rid of through teaching, and that is really a really horrible history in Canada.
Thank you, Sunny, for sharing that.
My camera. Hi, I can
Hi.
share about the other painting or picture.
Go for it.
First, both of them are very beautiful and colorful, and I like the diversity of colors. I think for me, it represents the diversity and complexity of translanguaging in and of itself. And then in the second painting, or picture, I mean, the person seems to be kind of juggling lots of things. It's a little bit more serene and positive, but there's a lot going on, and she does still seem very calm despite everything going on. So perhaps it's something about translanguaging being inherently like natural and easy, not complex.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Mimi. I also see people post their thoughts in the chat. Yeah. So again, this is something you can also show to your students, right? And let them sort of have some critical conversations around these two paintings. I think this will definitely help them to develop a more critical understanding of translanguaging, right? And how language is always related to power, identity, right? And monolingual structures, and how we can create a more equitable and inclusive space through a translanguaging stance, right? So that students can bring their full selves into the classrooms, right? Instead of their tongue has to be fixed, right? As you can see from the first picture, right? Actually, you can see they're trying to whiten their tongue, right? Like this so-called the standard American English, right? Usually spoken by white middle class speakers, right? This sort of like standardized way of using English. Okay, next one. And here are more translanguaging resources. Actually, I sort of like, because I'm a strong advocate for translanguaging pedagogies. And so I've been compiling different resources and together. So if you're interested, you can scan the QR code and that should direct you to a Word document. And you are more than welcome to download a copy for yourself. And you will find materials in different forms. So I've been compiling like short articles, books, websites, blogs, podcasts, and videos, right? These are all different genres that you can, and different ways that you can get different understandings of translanguaging. I hope they will continue to enhance your understanding of translanguaging and offer you more concrete ideas of implementing translanguaging pedagogies in classrooms of different contexts. And I also list a few books that I really like and recommend. They all address translanguaging in different contexts, right? And they some of them are written more like for scholarly audience. Some of them are more written for teacher audience. So I welcome you to check these books out. And I think the next one, and feel free to share the QR code in the chat later. Yeah, so that folks, yeah, thank you. Yeah, and Sunny and we also have a book coming out next February, and this book is specifically written for teachers. And in this book, we explore evidence-based, research-informed practical applications of translanguaging pedagogies in a variety of TESOL contexts, especially including more perspectives from scholars working in the global south. So if you're interested to learn more about the book and stay tuned about this, but want us to keep you posted about this book, you can scan the QR code. And next year, we'll be sharing more information about this book. Yeah. So, and I hope it will be a good resource, especially for teacher education programs, I think, because we really want to write this book for teachers, right? Because even though translanguaging has been around for over a decade, right? We still hear a lot of questions from practitioners and teachers, right? So how do we do this, right? So you've been talking about, okay, translanguaging is great, but what are some different concrete ways that you can show us, right? So in this book, you will find I hope you will find a lot of answers to these questions. Yeah. And so next slide. And I think here are some final reminders I think I want to share with you all. The first one is monolingual teachers can and should do translanguaging in their classrooms, right? Even though you may not speak your students' home languages, you can still create spaces that welcome them to bring their full selves and multilingual talents to teaching and learning. The second one is teacher agency matters. As teachers, you are language policymakers in your own classrooms. I hope you can consider making agentive moves to better support multilingual learners in your classrooms. And the last one is translanguaging is not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? It is important to contextualize translanguaging pedagogies based on different classroom contexts. It starts with who your learners are and what your lesson objectives are, right? And we start from there, and then let's think about how do you strategically create translanguaging spaces. With that said, I think here is one activity called translanguaging opportunities, right? Like maybe let's share our ideas, right? I know a lot of you all work in different contexts, right? Some of you from teacher education, higher education, some of you actually teach in K through 12 schools. So how do you plan on inviting translanguaging into your classroom and teaching practice? What would that look and sound like? So reflect on moments in your classroom or teaching that you have identified as opportunities for implementing translanguaging pedagogy. Feel free to review what we have learned and the translanguaging resources that I just shared. Describe moments in your classroom where you could potentially include or invite translanguaging into your classroom, and think about how do you really center social justice and equity, right, in teaching and learning. And feel free to share your examples with this community here, right? And maybe let's give folks some time, and then we can start sharing. Or feel free to just unmute yourself. Yeah.
I have an idea. I don't know if you guys can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you
Okay.
pretty well.
Well, we had the privilege to have you in our classroom yesterday. So I'm also taking a bit of like what you told us yesterday, about your journey for translanguaging and all that. I think an example you gave us was that having something as simple as having like posters, of like saying like say hello in different languages, like post around the room and having like visual like posters and other like visual things posted around the classroom, and even maybe have like drawings or like simple like a language portraits of the students of their home mixed with home language and their second language and posted around the classroom. I feel like that would be a great way to promote more of like an open, diverse translanguage environment. And I think that how I would see it is that like it would make the students feel more invited and more included, and also that their home language is also important and also like seen in the classroom as well as their second language. So that was just my take on it.
That's a great idea. Yeah, and that's a great start, right? Like the thinking about designing the physical classroom space, right, from a translanguaging dimension. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, thanks so much for your presentation. I actually work in teacher education, ESL teacher education, and it's an interesting space that I work in. But I guess one of the things I do with my future teacher candidates is when I first meet them, we talk about all the different languages that we know and the different contexts in which we mobilize them in hybrid ways sometimes, and the translanguaging practices we engage in. And so I try to be a model because I myself, being a speaker of more than one language, as frankly all of us are to some degree or another, I don't hesitate to model that behavior when I'm teaching, right? I'm often translanguaging between French and English, which are the two dominant languages between myself and my students, but inviting others as the moment as the translanguaging moment calls for. So I guess being a model of it myself.
Yeah. That's actually, thank you for sharing that. That's actually something I also been doing in my own teacher education class too, right? So I always position myself also as a multilingual transnational scholar, right? And then I will share a little bit more about my language learning story with my students. And I also often teach them some Chinese phrases, even in my in my teacher education classroom, so that they also understand, right, as ESL learners, right? Like they sort of like what you feel like when you learn a different language that you don't know yet, right? So that they sort of experience, sort of like different emotions throughout this journey, right? So that they can really understand, put themselves into the shoes of those immersion bilingual learners, right? So that they can also understand why it is important that we need to create a more inclusive space, right, for these bilingual learners. Yeah, thank you all for participating. I think I have one more slide, Sunny, if you could go to the next one. Yeah, so this is another great resource that you can use with your students, or if you're a teacher yourself, you can actually use this for self-evaluation, right? So I want to acknowledge this rubric was adapted from this book, right, The Translanguaging Classroom. And this book, actually, I highly recommend you to get a copy yourself because it's a great resource, especially for teacher training programs. They just released the second edition for this book. So what you're seeing here is the first edition. Now they have the second, it's more updated edition of the same title. So you can use this rubric that I showed you here to self-evaluate how you engaged with developing an understanding about translanguaging theory and pedagogy in terms of these different stands, right? So strengths, stance, design, and shifts. You can also use it to reflect on your own current teaching and how do you plan for a translanguaging pedagogy. Right? So you can see under each strand, there are some questions for you to reflect on, right? And have you already seen this in your own teaching? If not, what can you do to create space for these things to happen, right? So those are pretty much the two columns for you to reflect on. Yeah, and I think this is another great way, right, to ask your students, teacher candidates, to experience how do you design translanguaging space, and then reflect upon their teaching practices, right? Because ongoing reflection is also very important to help them continue to develop their stance, design, and shifts. I think with that said, yeah. So I hope you enjoyed today's talk. I hope you also have more ideas and get more excited about translanguaging theory and pedagogy. And in the next slide, I also have my email in my last slide. So if you have more questions, feel free to email me, and I'm happy to address those. Yeah, thank you all.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your talk. It was really insightful, and it really shared a lot about bridging theory to practice. So I'm curious to implement some of that and take a look at your resources. Thank you again. If anyone has any questions or comments, feel free to write in the chat or like open your mic or turn the little hand raising thing on.
I love the thank you in multiple languages.
Yeah, I tried to put it in Mandarin, and then I put languages that were a bit close to me. I see we have a question from Lemire, I believe.
Sure. Let's see.
Oh, I don't know if the person clicked the raising their hand by accident, but does anyone have any other questions if the Lemire person does not want to? Okay. Yes,
Hello.
Hawthorne.
Yeah, hello. Hello, everybody. Yeah, I was thinking, I have a question. Is it like, because this happens to me when I teach, and it is like, could we also use translanguaging when maybe you have a discussion and, and you have a few kids that are from the same, they speak the same language. Can I put them also in teams and let them, because like I sometimes for these kids I can explain, I can explain because my objective is that they understand what I'm doing. So I tell them, could I just ask them to go together and speak in their language? Can I do that also?
Yeah, I mean, that's one way of doing translanguaging, right? Like the strategically group students based on their same home language background. And you also mentioned, since your objective is more about understanding, right, what they're expected to do, right? Seems like a more sort of also efficient way, right? So that they can help each other understand the expectations for your class, right? So yeah, so I would say yes. Yeah, that is
Okay,
definitely a
thank
way of,
you.
yeah.
Thank you, that's great.
I just want to add, I think earlier Zhongfeng mentioned how important it is when we have to think of the objective of the activity. Right? So if the objective is to brainstorm for ideas, then that kind of discussion can be bilingual or plural. But then if the objective is to support their oral English development, then the way you design the task could be different. Then they can maybe brainstorm for ideas, do research so that they have ideas, and then they can stick to monolingual English in order to do the presentation. I find that is quite important. That's why I think he keep mentioning the word strategic.
Okay. Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Go for it, Monica.
Hey, I'm just thinking about that strategic thing you just said, because I think that's one of the big challenges, I think, when this kind of translanguaging approach is proposed, is that some classroom teachers, language teachers, can see their approach as very binary. It's either we don't allow any other languages in but the target language, or it's open season and it's used all the time, anytime, anywhere, and they'll never speak the target language. And I find that kind of, I'll be honest, a bit frustrating, that sort of diametric, it's black or white, it's in or everything approach. So the strategic is really key. I wonder if you have any hints or experiences to share about that strategic and communicating that strategicness, not just to the teachers themselves, but when teachers are doing it with the students, when and how is it important to be explaining to the students themselves about your translanguaging approach, the strategic when and how we're engaging in translanguaging? I guess we're always engaging in translanguaging, but I guess I'm trying to say, how do you talk to the students themselves about it, especially when they're kids?
Yeah, something simple. Actually, you can for example, let students when they engage in conversations, right? As teachers, you may encourage them. Okay, you can use whatever language you feel comfortable to have conversations, and maybe after that, I think teachers can just have a conversation with students about. So how did you feel when I say that? When I allowed you to have conversation using all the languages that you allowed to use, right? Does it help you or not? Right? Do you want to try it again or not? Right? And then you will see students, they may have conversations about this, right? A lot of them may have some critical understanding about, why this is helpful or why this is not, right? They may also develop more conversation in terms of their bilingual identity, right? The things like that. I think it is important that we not just only engage students in translanguaging conversations, but we also talk about why translanguaging is important with these kids, right? Because I think that is also an important aspect that we can also reach students' translanguaging awareness themselves, right? So that as they grow up, they can also understand the importance of translanguaging, right? And that I think will go a long way. Yeah.
All right. Are there any little final questions with the few minutes that we have left? I just want to say again, thank you, Zhe Ming, if I pronounced that correctly.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, 谢谢你。Yeah, thank you again for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation. And feel free to email me if you like to more resources. And I'm really passionate about translanguaging. So whenever there's something about translanguaging, email me. shoot me an email. Yeah. And yeah, thank you all.
Our next webinar.
Is there one last question? Or that was a typo with the.
No, I'm mixed up in my different buttons.
Oh, no,
I
it's
wanted to
okay.
clap. I wanted to say thank you, so I'm saying it now.
No worries. I pasted it in the chat, but anyone who's still here, feel free to check out our next webinar. So it's going to be with Bianca, Emily, Chloe, who will do a talk, Teachers as Researchers for Empowered Professional Development. So that will be on November 6th from 4 to 5 p.m.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank
See
you
you
so
next month.
much.
Thank